I have always been comfortable in my solitude, letting the silence of my apartment fill every corner and echo back at me with a kind of muted reassurance. My evenings fell into a quiet pattern, an old book and a cup of tea, the glow of classic movies flickering across the walls, sometimes a slow walk from window to window just to watch the world below as the streetlights blinked on. There was a sense of order to my days, a gentle rhythm that dulled the edges of loneliness. My neighbors existed at a safe distance, their presence limited to polite nods in the elevator or the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I never sought out conversation, never invited anyone in. It was easier that way. There were weeks when the only voice I heard was my own, humming softly as I cooked or murmuring along to a favorite song from decades ago. But that night the world felt different, as if the city itself had decided to slow down and breathe with me. The rain tapped against the windows, a steady drumming that made the apartment feel even more insulated from the chaos outside. I was halfway through a novel I'd read a dozen times before, lost in the comforting repetition, when the knock at my door broke the spell. For a moment, I simply sat still, unsure if I'd imagined the sound. It was late enough that I expected no one. The hallway beyond my door had always been a border between my little kingdom and everything else, and it rarely, if ever, was crossed from the outside. I set down my book, heart fluttering in my chest for reasons I couldn't name, and went to the door. The soft click of the deadbolt, the gentle creak as I pulled it open, and there she was, barefoot, rain-kissed, holding a mug in her hands with an uncertain smile. Something in her posture, the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot, reminded me of myself when I was younger, stepping into the unknown. Her presence felt like a sudden surge of energy, filling the entryway and pushing against the calm routine I'd so carefully built for myself. The scent of rain followed her inside, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee and vanilla that lingered in my kitchen. As I went to retrieve the sugar she had asked for, I caught glimpses of her curiosity. She took in the stacks of books on my shelves, the worn throw blanket over the back of my couch, the row of mismatched mugs that lined the counter. My home, which usually felt like a private, self-contained world, suddenly seemed exposed, every object a reflection of years spent in thoughtful isolation. I felt oddly vulnerable, but not unpleasantly so. It was more like the sensation of letting in a fresh breeze after too many days of closed windows. She filled the space with a lightness I'd nearly forgotten, moving with an ease that was both unfamiliar and inviting. Her laughter rang out, bright and unfiltered, as she commented on the eclectic mix of artwork on my walls or the fact that my slippers didn't match. The conversation, if it could be called that, wove through the apartment like a ribbon, looping around old memories and weaving in new impressions. Time lost its usual grip, and the hush of the rain made it feel as though we were the only two people awake in the world. By the time she left, clutching her cup and promising to return it soon, the silence in my apartment had changed. It was no longer the silent companion I had always relied upon, but something different, something charged and restless. I found myself lingering by the window long after, watching the glow of the hallway through the crack beneath my door. The night was the same as every other, but inside me, something small and vital had shifted, as if the world beyond my second-floor landing had finally, unexpectedly, reached in and touched me. The next evening, I found myself glancing at the door more often than usual, listening for footsteps in the hallway or the faint knock that would signal her return. My apartment felt different, charged with a new expectancy, though I told myself it was nothing. I busied my hands with routine, but every simple action, a plate set on the table, the whistling of the kettle, seemed sharper, more present. When her soft knock finally came, I answered it too quickly, and there she was again, her curls slightly damp, face glowing with the kind of energy that follows rain. She entered with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged, holding a covered dish with pride, cheeks flushed as she explained her experiment in baking. The aroma of warm pastry filled my kitchen as she placed the pie on the counter, her laughter spilling out as she apologized for the mess she'd made in her own apartment. She moved through my space like a gentle storm, opening cupboards to fetch plates, examining the magnets on my fridge, and peering out the window as if to memorize the city at night. I poured tea, she sliced pie, and we sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the air between us soft and close. Conversation came easily, threading from childhood stories to dreams about the future, through small confessions about loneliness and hope, disappointment and new beginnings. Her voice was bright, and she had the habit of tilting her head when she listened, as if every word I offered deserved her full attention. I realized how rarely I had truly spoken with someone in years, how much I had missed the sound of genuine laughter mingling with mine. The pie was warm, imperfect, sweet with too much sugar, but it was a comfort I didn't know I'd been craving. Outside, rain slipped along the glass, blurring the city lights into watercolor smudges. Inside, the kitchen grew warmer, the boundaries between guest and host dissolving with every shared bite. At some point, she pulled her knees to her chest, curling into the chair, looking so young and open it was almost painful. I watched the way her lips curved around a smile, the small flecks of sugar dusted across her fingertips, and felt the subtle ache of longing that comes from being seen. When the clock crept past midnight, she looked at the window, then back at me with a gentle shrug. She mentioned the late hour, the lingering rain, how the hallway would be cold and the night too long for unnecessary walks. The request to stay a little longer came wrapped in a quiet, hopeful tone, and I found myself agreeing before she finished. I fetched a spare blanket and laid it on the couch, my hands moving carefully, almost ceremoniously, as if I were preparing for something sacred. We settled in the living room, the pie forgotten, a record playing softly in the background. She stretched out, feet tucked beneath her, and I felt the air thicken with intimacy, not overt, not named, just the quiet closeness of two people sharing the hush of night. The flicker of streetlights danced across the ceiling, and the soft rhythm of her breathing joined the music, steady and real. I sat near her, feeling the warmth of her presence seep into my skin, changing the shape of my solitude. The hours slid by, the conversation fading into comfortable silence, each of us lost in the simple miracle of not being alone. When I finally drifted toward sleep, I heard her voice, softer now, almost a whisper. I don't remember the words, only the feeling they left behind, a gentle promise, an invitation to something unspoken. Wrapped in the low glow of the lamp and the faint scent of pie and rain, I closed my eyes with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years, knowing that when morning came, the world would look just a little different. The living room, still faintly scented with sugar and pastry, felt smaller in the dark. The only light came from a single lamp on the side table, throwing soft shadows across her face as she nestled deeper into the couch. I moved through the space as if it were a new landscape, suddenly aware of every detail, the hush between our words, the length of her legs stretched out beneath the blanket, the way her eyes lingered on me just a moment too long. The house had always been a fortress of solitude for me, but now it was crowded with possibilities, every gesture, every pause heavy with something unnamed. She picked a record from my old collection and placed it on the turntable, letting a gentle jazz melody spill out and fill the corners of the room. The music wrapped around us, creating a bubble that pressed the outside world further away. I tried to focus on the familiar comfort of the song, but my body betrayed me. My skin felt too sensitive, aware of the warmth radiating from her end of the couch, the subtle sound of her breath, the softness of her voice drifting toward me in fragments. Each time she shifted, my heart fluttered in response, unsteady and expectant. It became a game of small proximity. She draped her legs so they brushed against mine beneath the blanket, an accidental touch that neither of us hurried to correct. Our hands met when we reached for the same pillow, fingers brushing, lingering, then retreating as if the contact might burn. The television flickered in the background, but I could not follow the plot. My mind was consumed by the tension threading the room, both fragile and unbreakable, stretched thin as glass. I tried to convince myself it was only the late hour, the rain, the intimate lighting, but every time I met her eyes, I saw a question there, patient and insistent. She watched me with an openness I hadn't seen in years, and I wondered if she felt the same fever in her blood, the same restlessness beneath her skin. I realized I was holding my breath whenever she moved closer, the air between us humming with anticipation. There was a moment, small and unplanned, when she leaned into me to show me something on her phone. Her shoulder pressed into mine, her thigh flush against my leg, her hair brushing my cheek. I inhaled the scent of her skin, something clean and sweet, mingled with the ghost of rain, and felt a shiver run through me. The distance between us had vanished. My hand rested on my own knee, fingers twitching, uncertain whether to reach for her or retreat. She looked up, eyes shining, her lips parted as if she might say something important. Instead, she let her hand settle lightly on my arm, tracing a path down to my wrist in a gesture so gentle it was almost reverent. My skin tingled where she touched me. I felt the lines I had drawn for years, the boundaries of what was allowed, what was safe, blur and dissolve. The room held its breath. In that hush, the question became a silent invitation, a shared secret. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want to say no. I let myself lean into her warmth, let her hand linger on my skin, let the possibility settle between us like a new gravity. It was a fragile, trembling kind of permission, but it was real. In the quiet, with only the jazz playing and the storm whispering at the windows, I realized I was ready to let those limits slip away. The night pressed in gently, thick with the remnants of rain and the warmth that pulsed between us. The room felt suspended, as if the city outside had dissolved and left only the two of us and the low, golden glow from the lamp. I could feel her beside me, every inch of space charged, every movement sending a fresh ripple of awareness through my skin. My heart beat harder, the anticipation in my chest growing sharper each time her hand lingered on my arm or her thigh pressed against mine beneath the shared blanket. She turned to face me, the light catching in her eyes, her gaze open and unguarded. There was no hesitation left, just a quiet certainty, a gentle permission. Her hand moved to my cheek, warm and trembling, her thumb tracing the edge of my jaw. My breath caught in my throat as I closed my eyes and leaned into her touch. The world narrowed to the warmth of her palm, the softness of her lips as she brushed them over my forehead, then my cheek, then finally found my mouth. The first kiss was slow, searching, the kind of kiss that asks and answers in the same breath. I tasted the sweetness of pie, the spice of tea, the newness of her. Our lips met and parted again and again, growing deeper, more urgent, as if every unsaid word was being spoken through touch. She moved closer, the blanket slipping away, our bodies pressed together along their lengths. Her arms slid around my waist, drawing me into her, and I melted into the embrace, feeling the heat of her skin through my thin shirt, the steady drum of her heart against my chest. Her mouth trailed along my jaw, down the side of my neck, leaving a line of fire wherever she touched. My hands threaded through her curls, holding her close as my own lips found her shoulder, her collarbone, the hollow at the base of her throat. Every new inch of skin revealed sent a tremor through me, a delicious vulnerability, a sense of being seen and wanted all at once. She pulled my shirt up, her palms gliding over my stomach, my ribs, her fingers lingering at the places that made me gasp and shiver. I arched into her hands, my body aching to be known. We undressed each other slowly, clothing falling in soft piles to the floor. Her skin was smooth beneath my hands, soft and warm and impossibly inviting. I traced her spine, the dip of her waist, the curve of her hip, learning her like a language I'd always known but never spoken aloud. She kissed down my chest, her lips teasing at the swell of my breast, her tongue circling until my breath grew ragged and my fingers clutched at her shoulders. Her mouth closed over my nipple, hot and wet, and I moaned softly, unable to hold back the sound. Her hands moved lower, parting my thighs with gentle insistence, her palm sliding along the inside until I trembled. She looked up at me, her eyes dark and questioning, and I nodded, needing her more than I could say. Her fingers found me, slow at first, learning the rhythm of my body, the ways I liked to be touched. I lost myself in the feel of her, the quiet power of her hands, the heat building inside me with every caress. Her lips followed, pressing kisses down my belly, her breath ghosting over my skin, her tongue flicking at the place that made me cry out and arch up into her. I let go of everything, my doubt, my loneliness, the invisible lines I'd drawn around my life. She moved with purpose, reverence, her hands and mouth working in tandem until I broke open for her, every muscle tightening and releasing in a rush of pleasure that left me trembling. I pulled her up, needing her close, needing to give back what she'd given me. My hands slid under her shirt, peeling it away, tracing her breasts, her stomach, the slick heap between her thighs. She gasped when I touched her, her body arching into my hand, her breath coming in short, desperate bursts. I explored her, finding what made her shudder, what made her moan my name, what made her hips roll and her hands clutch at the sheets. I kissed her deeply, hungrily, swallowing her sighs, feeling her body tense and then dissolve against me. When she came, she pressed her face into my neck, her cry muffled by my skin, her arms wrapped tight around me. We stayed like that, limbs tangled, hearts pounding, sweat cooling on our skin. I held her, running my hands over her back, memorizing the shape of her, the feel of her breath on my shoulder. The night stretched on, quiet and infinite, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. As sleep crept over us, I pressed one last kiss to her temple and pulled the blanket around us, holding her close as the city outside faded away and I drifted into dreams, finally unafraid. Morning slipped quietly into the room, pale and uncertain, filtered through the blinds in thin gray lines. For a while, I floated between dreams and waking, wrapped in the warmth of bodies tangled under the blanket, unwilling to move, afraid that even the slightest shift might break the fragile spell of the night before. My body felt heavy and weightless at the same time, the aftershocks of pleasure humming low in my muscles, a subtle ache where she had touched me, held me, kissed me until nothing existed but the two of us and the dark. I kept my eyes closed, listening to her soft, even breaths, the gentle rise and fall of her chest pressed to my back. I could feel her arm draped loosely across my waist, her fingers curled against my stomach, a silent promise that even in sleep she did not want to let go. The apartment was silent except for the steady rhythm of our breathing and the distant sounds of the city waking up, a car engine rumbling to life, a door slamming somewhere far below, the shrill song of a bird too stubborn to wait for sunlight. The world felt impossibly far away, muffled and gentle, as if we had been granted this small pocket of time outside of reality, where nothing mattered except the heat of her skin against mine. I could smell her, faint traces of perfume and rain, the lingering sweetness of pie, the unmistakable intimacy of sweat and desire. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, to believe that the night had not ended, that we had not crossed a line, that we could simply exist together in the hush before morning made everything sharp and real again. Eventually, I opened my eyes and looked around the room, half expecting to find it changed, marked by the intensity of what had passed between us. But everything was as it had always been, the same books on the shelf, the same lamp casting its faded golden glow, the same clothes folded neatly over the chair. Only the scattered trail of discarded clothing and the shape of her in my bed gave away that anything extraordinary had happened. I studied her face, peaceful in sleep, mouth slightly parted, lashes dark against her cheek, a faint crease between her brows as if she were still dreaming something that troubled her. My heart twisted at the vulnerability of her, the raw, unguarded beauty of a woman who had trusted me enough to bear everything, her body, her longing, her hunger, her fear. I watched the sunlight creep across the blanket, inching closer to her bare shoulder, highlighting the sheen of sweat that had dried there, the ghost of a bruise where my mouth had lingered too long. My fingers ached to reach for her, to trace the lines of her spine, to memorize her with the tips of my hands. I wanted to hold on, to claim this moment, to carve it deep into memory before it slipped away. But I stayed still, uncertain, suspended on the edge between what had been and what would come next. I wondered if she would regret it, if she would wake and find the weight of reality too much to bear, if she would gather her clothes and slip out of my apartment without a word, leaving me alone with the echo of her laughter and the scent of her skin on my sheets. I tried to silence the doubts that pressed at the edge of my mind, the questions, the worries, the sharp, cold voice that told me this was a mistake, that happiness this fierce could only be temporary. But when she shifted beside me, her arm tightening around my waist, her lips brushing the nape of my neck with a sleepy sigh, all of that vanished. She did not let go. She did not run. She pressed herself closer, and I felt her breath warm against my shoulder, a quiet affirmation that she was still here, still with me, still part of whatever new story was beginning in the hush between night and day. After a while, she stirred, slowly stretching, her body unfurling beneath the blanket. She rolled onto her back, pulling me with her until my head rested against her chest, her hand stroking my hair in lazy circles. We stayed like that, cocooned in the soft, uncertain light, hearts beating together in a new, secret rhythm. I let myself relax, breathing in the steady thud of her pulse, the rise and fall of her breath. She traced her fingers along my arm, gentle and reassuring, and I felt the knot of anxiety in my chest begin to loosen. There were no words between us, no need to fill the silence with explanations or promises. Everything that mattered was contained in the quiet of her touch, the unspoken understanding that something had changed, something that could not be undone. Eventually, she nudged me upright, her eyes sleepy but clear. I wrapped the blanket around us both as we sat up, legs tangled together, the morning chill pricking at our bare skin. She smiled, a small, tired smile, full of warmth and a hint of mischief, and I found myself smiling back, unable to help it. The air between us was different now, full of new possibilities and the faintest trace of fear. We sat there for a long time, sipping coffee she insisted on making in my kitchen, moving around each other with an ease that felt both foreign and natural. I watched her moving through my space, wearing nothing but my old t-shirt, humming a tune under her breath, and realized that I wanted her to stay, that I wanted more mornings like this, full of uncertainty and hope. As the sun climbed higher, the world outside grew louder, intruding on our little sanctuary. She gathered her clothes in a loose bundle, folding them neatly, and laid them across the arm of the chair. For a moment, I worried again, worried she would leave and never come back, that this fragile morning would be all I'd have. But she turned to me, took my hand, and squeezed it softly, a silent promise that the night had not been a dream, that she was still here, that she wanted to be here. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of loneliness begin to lift. We didn't talk about what would happen next, didn't try to label what we were to each other. Instead, we let the morning carry us forward, step by uncertain step, trusting that whatever we had started in the darkness would find its way into the light. I watched her gather her things, watched her pause at the door, watched her look back at me with that same open, unguarded gaze that had drawn me in from the very beginning. And I knew, in that moment, that even if everything changed, even if nothing lasted, I would never regret letting her in. I would never regret crossing that invisible line, never regret the risk of loving her, even for one impossible, perfect night. The days that followed slipped by in a strange, bright haze, the edges of reality softened by memory and longing. Everything in my apartment seemed changed, as if the walls themselves remembered her touch and her laughter, as if her warmth still lingered in the air. I moved through my routines with an absent-minded tenderness, my body still humming from our night together, every sense sharpened and attuned to the echo of her presence. I found her hair on my pillow, her scent in my sheets, and every time I passed the couch, I remembered the weight of her body pressed against mine, her hands gentle and sure, her voice like a secret spoken only to me. My skin tingled with the memory of her breath, and I caught myself reaching out for her in the quiet hours before dawn, only to grasp at empty space. I waited for her message, for a knock on my door, for any sign that she felt it too, that she wanted what I wanted, a chance for more than a single night suspended between storm and sunrise. The anticipation grew with every hour, turning into a silent ache that I carried with me everywhere. I checked my phone too often, rereading our old text exchanges, searching for reassurance, for some clue that this new thing between us was real and not just a dream I had conjured up in the soft darkness. When a day passed with no word, then another, my confidence faltered, slipping away beneath the surface of anxiety and fear. I tried to rationalize it. She was busy, she needed space, maybe she was afraid, maybe she was waiting for me. But beneath it all, a quiet voice insisted that I had been foolish to hope, foolish to open the locked door of my heart after so many years. I told myself not to reach out, to give her time, but the silence was suffocating. Each night I slept restlessly, turning over the memories like stones in my hands, seeking comfort in their smoothness and weight. The city outside my window moved on, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the rooms of strangers. I imagined her across the hall, living her life as if nothing had happened, perhaps even laughing with friends, telling stories that no longer included me. My apartment felt emptier than ever, every shadow a reminder of what I had gained and lost in a single night. After nearly a week of silence, I could not bear it any longer. I composed a message, simple, casual, aching with everything I could not say, and sent it into the void. Hours passed without response, and the hope I'd been nursing flickered and began to die. I waited for her footsteps in the hall, for the light under her door, for some sign that she was still there, still reachable. But the building grew quieter each evening, and I realized, with a hollow certainty, that she had withdrawn from my world as suddenly as she had entered it. When I finally gathered the courage to knock on her door, my heart pounding and hands shaking, a stranger answered, a woman with tired eyes who explained that the girl I was looking for had left, that she had not said where she was going or when she would return. She had packed her things in the middle of the day and slipped away without fanfare, her absence as abrupt and unexplained as her arrival had once been. The door closed softly, leaving me alone in the hallway, staring at the place where her name had been written on a piece of tape beside the doorbell, now peeled away, the adhesive still faintly visible. The finality of it was a wound I hadn't expected. I wandered back to my apartment, numb, my mind refusing to accept that this was the end, that all the sweetness and longing, all the hope and trembling joy, had been only a brief interlude in the otherwise unremarkable story of my life. I tried to find solace in the memories, replaying the way she had looked at me, the heat of her mouth, the laughter that had spilled out of her so easily. I tried to hold on to the feeling of her arms around me, the steady certainty that, for one night, I had been loved without condition or hesitation. But as the days stretched on and the silence deepened, I understood that some stories do not have answers, that some questions echo in the spaces between heartbeats and remain forever unresolved. I kept her cup on my shelf, the one she had brought that first night when she came to borrow sugar. I touched it sometimes, tracing the curve of the handle, remembering her fingers around it, her smile in my kitchen, the warmth in her eyes as she looked at me from across the table. I tried to let her go, to close the door I had so bravely opened, but I could not banish her from the corners of my heart. I saw her everywhere, in the shape of strangers on the street, in the curve of a shoulder glimpsed in a crowd, in the laughter of someone else's friend echoing down the hallway. Every reminder hurt, but there was a strange comfort in the ache, a proof that what we had was real, even if it was gone. I wanted to be angry, to hate her for leaving without a word, for giving me a taste of something I never knew I was starving for. But instead, I felt grateful for the wound, grateful for the way she had cracked open my quiet life and shown me the colors burning beneath the gray. People talk about closure as if it's something you can buy or earn or achieve, but I learned to live with the unfinished ending, the sudden emptiness where hope had lived. I moved through my days with a quiet reverence, honoring what had happened, nursing the pain and the beauty of it until they became part of the fabric of who I was. Sometimes, late at night, I would light a candle and sit by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass, and I would let myself remember every detail: her touch, her voice, the taste of her kiss, the way she had said my name in the dark. I knew she was gone, that she might never return, that there might never be an explanation or a reunion or a second chance. But I also knew that for a brief, blinding moment, I had allowed myself to love and be loved, to step outside the safety of solitude and into the fire of something wild and true. And even as the world spun on, indifferent and unstoppable, I carried her with me, a ghost, a lesson, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected endings are the ones that change us forever.